Hi, folks. Good morning, and welcome to class 4 of nonprofit management. And in this class, as you can see, we'll cover the issue of faith-based nonprofit organizations and look at both the positive, normatively positive aspects that faith-based organizations bring to the table, as well as some negatives like are faith-based organizations always good is a question we'll examine. Conversely, we could also ask, do faith-based organizations cause more harm than good, and what is their role really? So we look at these questions from an American perspective, given that we are in the US, and also examine related questions in terms of accountability, like who does a faith-based organization, who are they accountable to? Is it just their donors? Is it their faith community? Is it the American government in the case of international development? So this is the main question that we'll examine in the context of the institutional dynamics within a nonprofit, and also the identity aspects, whether faith-based organizations are NGOs first or are they religious institutions first. So this is a visible tension that exists in these organizations. So pause this video for a second, and I realize this is an online format, so please pause this video right now and write this down as we as this video progresses. Think of a few FBOs that you can think of. Think of what values do they bring to the table, and how are they different from the values that you can identify, if at all, with secular organizations. And what is really religious and secular in public life? Like, what do these terms mean to you? And we'll examine this a little more closely as we move ahead. But for now, think of this as your background, question that you need to worry about. So once you're done, please move on to the next slides. You can continue with this video. So as I said earlier, some big picture questions that in terms of practical applications that you might come across as a researcher or as a scholar is what are the key problems when it comes to faith-based activism globally. For instance, there are many faith-based organizations, both from the Christian side, from the Jewish perspective, as well as more and more smaller Islamic organizations like Islamic Relief, Helping Hands, etc., which are acting as agents around the world, providing humanitarian aid, providing services, providing, in some cases, much needed help. So and much of this work also happens in conjunction with the USAID, which is United States Agency for International Development, which is an agency of the United States government, and other entities and arms of United States government. So a lot of this also happens as subcontracting, as you may be aware. So the USAID contracts these organizations for various purposes to conduct certain aid work in certain regions. So we'll also look at what is the magnitude of faith-based work globally, and what impact does it have on how these NGOs are perceived, how United States government is perceived, and what implications it has for all of us. So I want to take a step back and look at this core idea of public religions in the modern world, which is the notion of desecularization of the world, in the sense that a scholar at Georgetown University, Jose Casanova, argues that we are witnessing all of these phenomena, including nonprofits which are faith-based working in the public sphere. We are witnessing greater religiosity, especially in the United States, particularly as part of a desecularization of the world, by which he means that people are becoming more and more religious, contrary to the secularization theory, which says that essentially as the world becomes more modern, that religion will become less important. He says that's not the case, and religion is being making a comeback, and in the public sphere it's being transformed. So it's being transformed into an agent of change, agent of contestation of values, I mean, we are witnessing that in not such a positive way in the US with the whole culture wars and things like that. So it's is as Casanova says, this is a new age we're witnessing, and this is visible in many countries, not necessarily Europe, but primarily in United States and many parts of the developing world as well. And I really like the last quote on this slide with Jonathan Benthal, who studies anthropologist of religion. He says religion is sort of resistant to a lot of things. So you throw religion out of the window and it comes flying through the door. So it's there for us to deal with, as much as we may not like having religious symbols, religious ideas in the public sphere, given that we are a secular society. So again, please watch this interesting video by Casanova, and I hope you'll enjoy it. So some of the pros and cons of NGOs that exist, especially when it comes to faith-based activism, both in providing aid as well as being agents of cultural change in the international context, are listed here. So pause this video again and have a look at what this means. I have listed some examples from Sri Lanka, peace building, and also controversial ones where many of these faith-based organizations act. They are not supposed to proselytize in any context. That's part of the agreement that there have been charters and conventions which try to enforce this. But again, this happens. And this is part of the entire discourse, unfortunately, going back to, you could say, 17th or 18th century, where Christian missionaries went abroad and tried to civilize the native, so to say, especially in the developing world. So these are, cultural issues which are not always pleasant and have had a fairly negative impact on many parts of the world. So these are some issues that we can examine when we think of international NGOs and faith-based organizations. So I hope you enjoyed the readings. I've included a few select readings. The one by Ferris is largely about Christian organizations and also the emergence of certain other organizations from other faith traditions. And the reason I assigned this is for you to get a sense of the magnitude of how much money is flowing through them. So she points out it's about $8.5 billion per year. And also the reason that they exist and the reason they are proliferating is because they are rooted in certain religious traditions that have a strong focus on charity. And it's the donors who want these organizations to either help in disaster relief, either contribute their efforts in fixing some of the situations around the world. And this, especially post World War II, there has been a dramatic uptick in terms of responding to humanitarian need and also long-term development. And a point that needs to be reinforced is that government contracting, as I said earlier, is a big part of this process. So I did a paper sometime back which involved interviews with Catholic Relief Services, and the president pointed out that between 25 to 75% of the budget comes from government grants. It depends on with their location, but and it varies across the years. But that's a good ballpark for us to keep in mind. One of the positives of their involvement is that they do play a key role in raising awareness of certain issues. So, especially for donors who may not be that involved in various issues, faith-based organizations, through their work, help raise awareness of issues and bring people to the table to act on them, and also in some cases lobby the government to do stuff. So I've listed a few faith-based organizations for those of you who may not know their names. These are nine of the 10 voluntary refugee resettlement agencies, for instance, are faith-based, except for International Rescue Committee at the bottom right-hand corner, which is a secular organization. Again, here you see the massive scale of refugee resettlement agencies that are advocating for various issues in their communities locally, as well as working abroad with UN agencies and whatnot. Here is an example of Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, which is one of the NGOs that I studied. It is a Jewish faith-based organization, and as you can see, I am on their mail list. and they are pretty active when it comes to lobbying the government to allow more refugees to come to the U.S. They're also very active at fundraising and also working with. They work across the spectrum of this chain of activities that what we call refugee resettlement in the U.S. I hope again you enjoyed the video by Tiony Ferry, which talks a lot about the paradoxes of humanitarian aid. And the biggest tension she points out is that aid can actually prolong war, like in the sense that because new aid is supposed to be neutral, you are supposed to give aid to anyone without thinking about whether they are the enemy or a friend. I mean, if you're looking at it from a Western perspective, and neutrality is something that needs to be kept in mind, then she says that can be a huge paradox because you might be prolonging a war, you might be actually helping criminals, you're helping people who are terrorists, and she starts off the video with that. So that's a big paradox, and it's in fact I've had the fortune of studying with the executive director of World Food Program. She was a professor at Syracuse University, and she pointed out that yes, that's an obvious thing, and there's no way around it. Because if women and children are involved and you don't want people to die, that's the only thing you got to do. You've got to give aid to people who you may not like, who you may not agree with politically, but from a humanitarian perspective, you've got to do what you got to do at certain times. And that's basically what I have for you this week. And please participate in the discussion question. And I look forward to meeting you all. Have a good break, and thank you for your attention.